Layla Johnson is a young ballerina with extraordinary talent, but her journey is filled with unexpected challenges. When she's given the chance to perform at a prestigious gala, she quickly learns that talent isn't always enough to break through prejudice. Faced with setbacks and doubt, Layla must fight to prove she belongs in the world of elite ballet. Her ultimate test comes when she auditions for the New York City Ballet. But will she rise above the obstacles or let them define her future? Curious to see how her story unfolds? Comment below if Layla's journey resonates with you, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring tales of determination and resilience. Layla Johnson stood barefoot in her living room, the worn wood floor cool beneath her feet. It was early, not even 7 a.m., and the world outside their small apartment was just beginning to stir. She could hear the faint sounds of cars in the distance, the hum of morning traffic making its way through the busy streets of their Connecticut town. Inside, the apartment was quiet, save for the scratchy classical music coming from her mother's old radio in the kitchen. Layla's arms floated above her head, her dark brown legs strong and lean, their muscles flexed in anticipation of the next movement. She imagined herself in a grand theater, the lights dimming as she took center stage, her pointe shoes tapping lightly against the polished wood. In her mind, she wore a brilliant tutu, shimmering under the spotlight. But in reality, she stood in her living room, dressed in a second-hand leotard that was slightly too tight, her skin glistening with sweat from early morning practice. She closed her eyes, feeling the familiar pull of the music, letting it guide her into a graceful pirouette. Her feet moved precisely, her arms elegant as they floated through the air, mimicking the movements she had memorized after hours of watching professional ballerinas on YouTube. She had been practicing this routine for weeks, determined to perfect every leap, every spin, every delicate gesture. Ballet was her world, her sanctuary from everything else, and she poured all her energy into it. "That's it, Layla," a voice said softly behind her. "Beautiful." Layla came out of her spin, slightly out of breath but smiling at the praise. She turned to see her mother, Karen Johnson, leaning against the doorframe, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her face was flushed from cooking breakfast, and her brown eyes were tired, but there was no mistaking pride in them. "You've been practicing a lot, baby," Karen said, stepping into the living room. "Don't you want to rest a little before school?" Layla shook her head, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. "No, Mama. I need to get this right. Miss Parker said my turnout's been improving, but I want it to be perfect." Karen smiled softly, reaching out to brush a strand of Layla's curly hair back from her forehead. "You're always so determined, but don't forget you're only 10. You've got time to grow." Layla nodded, but the weight of her mother's words sat heavy on her shoulders. Time didn't feel like something she had. Every day she practiced, every leap she took, she felt the pressure to succeed, to be the best. She was the only black girl at Bayside Ballet Academy, and sometimes it felt like she had to work twice as hard to be noticed, twice as hard to be considered just as good as the other girls. Karen seemed to sense her daughter's unease and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're going to make it, Layla. I know it." Layla smiled, though there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "I hope so." Karen kissed the top of Layla's head before heading back to the kitchen, leaving Layla alone with her thoughts. She glanced around the small living room. The apartment they lived in was old and cramped, with faded wallpaper and mismatched furniture. A small table with chipped paint held her mother's favorite vase, a gift from Layla's grandmother. On the walls hung framed photos of Layla as a baby, alongside a few of her ballet recital pictures, showing her in hand-me-down costumes from older students. The apartment was modest, but it was home, and despite their financial struggles, there was love in every corner. Layla walked over to the radio and turned up the volume slightly. The soft notes of Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake filled the room, and she let herself get lost in the music again, imagining what it would be like to dance on a big stage someday, to have an audience full of people who had come just to see her. But no matter how much she dreamed, the reality of her situation was never far behind. She didn't have the best ballet shoes, the fanciest leotards, or the extra private lessons that many of the girls at Bayside Ballet Academy could afford. And sometimes when she was practicing late at night, her feet aching and her body exhausted, she wondered if her dreams were just too far out of reach. Later that morning, Layla stood outside Bayside Ballet Academy, her hands clutching the worn straps of her dance bag. The imposing glass doors gleamed in the sunlight, reflecting the world outside, a world that most days felt completely foreign to her. The academy was beautiful, with its pristine white walls, polished floors, and wide open spaces that seemed to scream luxury. It was nothing like the small apartment she had left behind. As Layla walked through the entrance, the smell of polished wood and fresh paint greeted her. The familiar sounds of pointe shoes tapping against the floor, soft classical music playing in the background, and quiet whispers between dancers filled the air. Bayside was one of the most prestigious ballet schools in the region, and Layla had earned her place here through hard work and determination. But no matter how much she loved ballet, there was always a sense of unease that came with being here, a feeling that she didn't quite fit in. "Layla!" a voice called out. She turned to see her teacher, Evelyn Parker, walking toward her with a clipboard in hand. Miss Parker was tall and elegant, her hair pulled back into a tight bun. She moved with a grace that spoke of years spent dancing professionally before she had transitioned into teaching. Her eyes were kind, though always sharp when it came to technique. "Good morning, Miss Parker," Layla greeted her, trying to push aside her nerves. Miss Parker smiled, but there was a seriousness to her expression as she glanced at the clipboard. "I'm glad you're early today. We've got a lot to work on before the next recital. Your technique has been improving, but there's still room for more strength in your core. We'll focus on that today." Layla nodded, grateful for Miss Parker's attention, but feeling the weight of her teacher's words. She knew she had to improve and had to keep getting better if she ever wanted a shot at the lead roles. At Bayside, the competition was fierce, and most of the other girls had been dancing in prestigious programs since they could walk. As Layla made her way into the main studio, she saw the other girls gathered near the bar, stretching and chatting in their usual clusters. Most of them were dressed in immaculate designer leotards, their hair perfectly slicked back into buns that looked like they had been sculpted by professionals. Layla could feel their eyes on her as she entered, though they quickly turned back to their conversations. At the center of the room was Jessica Winters, the Academy's star student. Jessica was everything Layla wasn't. Blonde, tall, and impossibly graceful, with long limbs that moved like they were made of silk. She was also rich, her family known throughout the town for their wealth and influence. Jessica always had the best costumes, the best ballet shoes, and she was constantly being praised by the instructors for her flawless technique. As Layla unpacked her bag, pulling out her scuffed ballet shoes, she couldn't help but glance at Jessica, who was talking animatedly with her friends about their summer plans. "Paris is so boring this time of year," Jessica was saying, her voice light and airy. "But my parents insisted we go. I wish they'd let me stay home and train instead." One of the other girls, Ashley, giggled. "At least you'll have a private coach while you're there. I'd give anything to train in Paris for a summer." Layla's heart sank as she listened. She had spent the past summer in her apartment, practicing ballet moves in her living room, while her mother worked late shifts at the grocery store. There were no trips to Paris, no private coaches, just long hours of practice and a growing feeling that no matter how hard she worked, she would always be behind. "Positions, girls!" Miss Parker's voice cut through the room, snapping everyone to attention. Layla took her place at the bar, feeling the familiar comfort of the wood beneath her hands. This was her world now, the world of dance. And no matter how different she felt from the other girls, she belonged here. She had earned her spot. The music began, and Layla focused on her movements, her body falling into the rhythm of the warm-up routine. Her feet pointed and flexed with precision, her arms moving gracefully through the motions. Miss Parker walked around the room, correcting postures, adjusting arm positions, and offering words of encouragement. "Jessica, lovely extension," she said as she passed by. "Ashley, keep those shoulders down." When she reached Layla, Miss Parker paused for a moment, watching her closely. "Layla," she said softly, "your turnout is improving, but you're holding tension in your upper body. Try to relax your shoulders and let your arms move more fluidly." Layla nodded, adjusting her posture as Miss Parker moved on. She could feel the tension in her muscles, the weight of her own expectations pressing down on her. But she kept going, determined to prove herself, determined to be more than just the scholarship girl. Later that evening, Layla sat at the kitchen table, a half-finished math worksheet spread out in front of her. She tapped her pencil against the edge of the table, her mind wandering back to the studio. No matter how much she practiced, it never felt like enough. She wanted so badly to be like Jessica, to be seen as someone who had the potential to be great. But it felt like there was always a gap between her and the rest of the girls at Bayside, a gap she wasn't sure how to close. The door creaked open, and Karen walked in, carrying a grocery bag in each arm. Her face was flushed from the cold outside, and her jacket was damp from the rain. She set the bags down on the counter with a heavy sigh, glancing over at Layla. "How was practice today, mija?" she asked, pulling out a loaf of bread and a carton of milk. Layla forced a smile, though she could still feel the weight of the day pressing down on her. "It was okay. Miss Parker said I need to work on my arms." Karen gave her a sympathetic look. "You'll get there. It just takes time." Layla nodded, but the doubt was still there, lingering in the back of her mind. She watched as her mother unpacked the rest of the groceries: eggs, canned soup, a box of pasta. The fridge was nearly empty, and the sight of the meager groceries made Layla's heart tighten with guilt. She knew how hard her mother worked to make ends meet, juggling 2 jobs just to pay for rent, food, and her ballet classes. It was a struggle, but Karen never complained. She did everything she could to keep Layla's dreams alive. "Miss Parker mentioned the recital again today," Layla said quietly, not looking up from her homework. Karen paused, her hand hovering over a can of soup. "The one in 2 months?" Layla nodded. "Yeah, I'm going to need a new costume for it, and new shoes probably." Karen set the can down and walked over to the table, sitting across from her daughter. She reached out and took Layla's hand, her eyes soft but firm. "We'll figure it out, okay? Don't worry about that." Layla bit her lip, trying to hold back the guilt that was building in her chest. "But it's so expensive, Mama, and you're already working so much." Karen squeezed her hand. "Layla, listen to me. You have a gift, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure you keep dancing. Don't you worry about the money. You just focus on being the best dancer you can be." Layla nodded, blinking back tears. She knew her mother meant every word, but the weight of their financial situation was never far from her mind. It wasn't just about the cost of the costumes or the shoes. It was about the sacrifices Karen made every day. Sacrifices that Layla knew she couldn't ever repay. After dinner, Layla went back to her room, sitting on the edge of her bed as she stared at her ballet shoes. They were old, the satin worn and frayed from months of practice. She had patched them up with glue and tape, but they wouldn't last much longer. She thought about the shoes Jessica wore, new, pristine, perfectly fitted, and the gap between them felt impossibly wide. Layla lay back on her bed, staring up at the ceiling. She had always dreamed of dancing on the biggest stages, of being the lead in productions like Swan Lake or The Nutcracker. But those dreams felt so far away now. How could she ever reach that level when she was constantly struggling just to keep up? As she lay there, the sounds of her mother moving around in the kitchen filled the apartment. Familiar, comforting noises that reminded Layla of everything her mother had done for her. Karen had always believed in her, always pushed her to follow her dreams, no matter how impossible they seemed. Layla took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. She couldn't give up. Not now. Not when her mother was working so hard to make sure she had a chance. She had to keep going, had to keep pushing herself, no matter how difficult it got. The following week, as Layla walked into the ballet studio, she noticed an unusual buzz of excitement among the girls. They were huddled together in small groups, whispering and glancing toward the office where Miss Parker and Mr. Hawkins, the director of the academy, were talking. Layla set her bag down and began to stretch. Her curiosity piqued. Something was happening, and it was making the normally calm studio feel electric with anticipation. Just as Layla was about to ask someone what was going on, the door to the office opened, and Miss Parker stepped out, her expression a mixture of urgency and excitement. She clapped her hands, calling everyone's attention. "Girls, I need everyone to gather around for an important announcement," Miss Parker said, her voice steady but serious. The girls quickly formed a semicircle around her, their eyes wide with curiosity. Layla stood near the back, her heart pounding in her chest. Whatever this was, it was big. Miss Parker cleared her throat and glanced at the clipboard in her hand. As some of you may know, the Winters Family Gala is coming up in 2 weeks. It's one of the biggest social events of the year, and our academy has been asked to provide the entertainment. A ripple of excitement passed through the group. The Winters Gala was a legendary, lavish event hosted by the wealthy Winters family, with a guest list that included some of the most influential people in the city. It was an honor to be asked to perform there, and everyone knew it. Originally, Jessica was scheduled to perform as the lead dancer for the event, Miss Parker continued, her eyes scanning the room. However, due to unforeseen circumstances, Jessica will no longer be able to participate. Layla's breath caught in her throat. Jessica was out? What did that mean? Miss Parker took a deep breath, her eyes landing on Layla. After careful consideration, we've decided that Layla will take Jessica's place as the lead performer. The room fell silent. Layla's heart stopped. Had she heard that right? Miss Parker wanted her to perform at the Winters Gala, the most prestigious event of the year? The other girls exchanged glances, some of them looking shocked, others envious. Layla could feel the weight of their stares, the pressure building in the room as the news sank in. Layla, Miss Parker said, her voice steady, do you know the routine? Layla nodded, though her mind was racing. She had practiced Jessica's routine in her spare time, but she had never imagined she would actually get the chance to perform it. The thought of stepping into Jessica's shoes, of dancing in front of all those people, was both thrilling and terrifying. Good, Miss Parker said with a small smile. We'll spend the next 2 weeks preparing you for the performance. It's an incredible opportunity, and I know you'll do great. Layla could barely breathe as the girls around her began to murmur in excitement. She had dreamed of a chance like this for as long as she could remember, but now that it was actually happening, the reality of it felt overwhelming. As the other girls dispersed to begin their warm-ups, Layla stood frozen, her mind buzzing with a million thoughts. This was it. This was her moment, the chance to prove herself. But as the excitement built in her chest, so did the fear. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she failed? Jessica's friends shot her envious glances as they walked past, and Layla could feel their eyes on her, judging her, wondering if she could live up to the expectations. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. This was her chance to shine, but the road ahead was going to be anything but easy. The following days were a blur of rehearsals, stretching routines, and late nights spent practicing until Layla's muscles burned. She had only 2 weeks to prepare for the Winters Gala, and the pressure weighed heavily on her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the lavish ballroom, the gleaming chandeliers, the rows of perfectly dressed guests, all watching her. The image filled her with both excitement and dread. Miss Parker had her practicing more intensely than ever before, correcting every small mistake with precision. Each session felt like a marathon, pushing Layla's body and mind to their limits. The other girls at Bayside Ballet Academy were supportive enough on the surface, offering polite encouragement, but Layla could feel the tension simmering beneath their words. There was a quiet expectation that she might not be able to live up to the role, that maybe she wasn't the right choice to take Jessica's place. Layla would often catch Jessica's friends watching her during rehearsals, whispering amongst themselves. She tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the corrections Miss Parker gave her, but the constant feeling of being scrutinized was exhausting. One afternoon, as Layla finished a grueling round of pirouettes, she collapsed onto the floor, her chest heaving with exhaustion. Miss Parker, standing nearby with her arms crossed, sighed and walked over. "You're not using your turnout properly, Layla," Miss Parker said, her voice calm but firm. "You're forcing it from your feet instead of letting the movement come from your hips. That's why you're losing balance." Layla nodded, too winded to respond. She pushed herself up from the floor, her legs trembling as she stood. Every muscle in her body ached, and the familiar sense of doubt began to creep in again. What if she couldn't do this? What if she was a terrible choice for the lead? "Take a short break," Miss Parker said, softening her tone slightly. "Then we'll go again." Layla nodded, grateful for the brief respite. She grabbed her water bottle and headed to the corner of the room, where she sat down and rested her back against the cool wall. The other girls were gathered nearby, laughing and stretching. Layla's eyes drifted over to them, catching bits of their conversation. I can't believe they picked Layla for the gala, one of the girls, Sophie, whispered to another. I mean, she's good, but she's not Jessica. The other girl, Molly, shrugged. Miss Parker said she's improving, but still, it's a big risk. The Winters family expects perfection. Layla felt her stomach twist, but she forced herself to keep sipping her water. She couldn't let their words get to her. This was her moment, and she was determined to make the most of it. When she got home that evening, the familiar comfort of their small apartment felt more like a refuge than ever before. Karen was already in the kitchen, preparing dinner, and the smell of garlic and onions filled the air. Hey, Mija, Karen said, looking up with a tired but warm smile. How was rehearsal today? Layla dropped her dance bag by the door and sank into one of the kitchen chairs, groaning in exhaustion. It was tough. Miss Parker is working me harder than ever. I think my legs are going to fall off. Karen chuckled and turned back to the stove. That's a good sign, right? You're pushing yourself. That means you're getting better. Layla rubbed her sore calves, her mind still racing with thoughts of the gala. I don't know, Mama. What if I'm not good enough? What if I mess up and ruin the whole thing? Karen paused for a moment, then walked over and sat down beside her daughter. She reached out, placing a gentle hand on Layla's arm. Listen to me, she said softly. You've worked so hard for this. You've earned this opportunity, and I know you're going to shine. Don't let anyone make you doubt yourself. Layla nodded, but the knot of anxiety in her chest remained. Her mother's words were comforting, but they didn't erase the fear of failure that had been growing inside her since the moment she was chosen to perform at the gala. I don't want to let anyone down, Layla whispered, her voice small. Karen squeezed her arm, her expression filled with love and determination. You could never let me down, Layla. You've already made me so proud. Now it's time for you to believe in yourself the way I believe in you. Layla felt a tear slip down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away. She leaned into her mother's embrace, letting the warmth of Karen's arms chase away the doubts. Even if only for a moment. With only a week left until the Winters Gala, the rehearsals became even more intense. The hours stretched longer, the corrections from Miss Parker grew more critical, and the pressure seemed to mount with each passing day. Layla was constantly practicing, at the studio, at home, even mentally rehearsing the steps while she sat in class at school. She had never been more focused on perfecting a routine in her life, but the pressure came growing frustration. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult rehearsal, Layla found herself sitting on the floor of the studio, tears stinging her eyes. She had missed the same combination of steps 3 times in a row, and Miss Parker's patience was wearing thin. Layla, Miss Parker said, her voice tight with frustration, you need to stop second-guessing yourself. You're thinking too much about every movement. Just let it flow. Trust your body. Layla nodded, biting her lip to keep the tears from spilling over. She had heard those words before, but they never felt as easy to follow as they sounded. How was she supposed to stop thinking when every mistake felt like it could cost her everything? The other girls were packing up their bags, their eyes occasionally flicking toward Layla as she sat there, still struggling to compose herself. Sophie and Molly were whispering again, and Layla could guess what they were saying. She wasn't Jessica. She wasn't their first choice. And every time she stumbled, every time she missed a step, it felt like she was proving them right. Miss Parker knelt down beside her, softening her tone. Layla, look at me. Layla glanced up, her vision blurred with tears. You have everything you need to succeed, Miss Parker said gently. But you're letting the pressure get to you. You're focusing so much on being perfect that you're forgetting to just dance. I know it's hard, but you have to trust yourself. You've worked for this. You deserve to be on that stage. Layla swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded again. She wanted to believe Miss Parker's words, wanted to believe that she could do this, but the weight of everyone's expectations felt like too much to carry, and as the gala drew closer, that weight only grew heavier. At home that night, Layla sat at the kitchen table, her ballet shoes resting on the floor beside her chair. She stared at them, her mind replaying every mistake she had made during rehearsal. She had barely touched her dinner, and Karen had noticed. You're awfully quiet tonight, Karen said, sitting down across from her. Everything okay? Layla shrugged, not trusting herself to speak without her emotions spilling over. She knew her mother was worried, but she didn't want to burden her with the fears that had been swirling in her mind for weeks. Karen reached across the table and took Layla's hand, her touch warm and steady. Talk to me, Mija. Layla hesitated for a moment, then let out a shaky breath. What if I can't do it, Mama? What if I get up there and make a fool of myself? Everyone's expecting me to be perfect, but I'm not. I don't know if I'm ready. Karen's expression softened with understanding. She squeezed Layla's hand gently. Layla, no one is asking you to be perfect. All anyone can ask is that you do your best. You've been working so hard, and I know you're going to be amazing. But even if something doesn't go perfectly, that doesn't take away from how talented you are. Layla bit her lip, her eyes filled with tears. But what if I let everyone down? What if I let you down? Karen's face softened even more, and she stood up, walking around the table to wrap her arms around Layla's shoulders. She pulled her daughter close, stroking her hair as she spoke softly. You could never let me down, baby. You're the bravest, strongest person I know. And no matter what happens at the gala, I'm already so proud of you. You've already won. Layla leaned into her mother's embrace, letting the warmth and comfort wash over her. She wanted to believe Karen's words, wanted to hold on to the strength her mother always seemed to give her. But the fear of failure was still there, lurking in the back of her mind, waiting to strike. As the gala approached, Layla knew she would have to confront that fear head-on. There was no turning back now. The night of the Winter's Gala arrived, and the air was electric with excitement. Layla sat in the back seat of her mother's car, staring out the window as they drove through the winding streets that led to the Winters' sprawling estate. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the landscape. But Layla's thoughts were far from peaceful. Her heart pounded in her chest, her stomach twisting into nervous knots. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, weeks for grueling rehearsals, late-night practices, and mental preparation. But now that the gala was here, the weight of it all felt crushing. You look beautiful, Mija, Karen said from the driver's seat, glancing at her daughter in the rearview mirror. Layla was dressed in her performance costume, a stunning white tutu that shimmered in the fading light. Her hair was pulled back into a sleek bun, and her makeup had been carefully applied by one of the older girls at the academy. Layla managed a small smile, but the anxiety bubbling in her chest made it hard to focus on anything but the performance ahead. As they approached the entrance to the Winters mansion, Layla's breath caught in her throat. The estate was even more magnificent than she had imagined. The driveway was lined with elegant lanterns, and the grand facade of the mansion loomed above them like something out of a fairy tale. Luxury cars were parked in neat rows, and well-dressed guests were already making their way inside, their laughter and conversation filling the air. Karen parked the car and turned to face her daughter, her eyes filled with warmth and pride. You're going to be amazing, Layla. Just remember what we talked about. You've worked hard for this, and no matter what, you've already accomplished something incredible. Layla nodded, though her heart was still racing. She wished she could feel the confidence her mother had in her, but all she could think about was the moment she would step onto the stage, the moment when every eye in the room would be on her. Together they walked toward the entrance, where they were greeted by the event coordinator, Janet Mills. Janet was brisk and efficient, barely glancing at Layla as she ushered them inside. You'll be waiting backstage until it's time for your performance, Janet said, her voice sharp. Make sure you're ready when I call for you. Layla nodded, gripping her dance bag tightly as they followed Janet through the grand halls of the mansion. The interior was even more opulent than the outside. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and the marble floors gleamed underfoot. Everywhere Layla looked, there were signs of wealth and privilege. It was a world she had only ever seen in movies and magazines, and now she was standing in the middle of it. Karen gave her daughter's hand a reassuring squeeze before heading to find a seat in the audience. I'll be watching, baby. You've got this. Layla swallowed hard and nodded. Thanks, Mama. Once she was alone backstage, the weight of the moment settled over her. She stood in the dimly lit wings, listening to the soft murmur of the crowd on the other side of the curtain. Her heart pounded in her chest, her palms sweaty as she adjusted the straps of her costume. The minutes ticked by slowly, each one heightening the tension in the room. Finally, Janet appeared beside her, clipboard in hand. "You're on in 2 minutes," she said curtly. Layla nodded, taking a deep breath as she positioned herself at the edge of the stage. The soft strains of Tchaikovsky's Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy filled the air, signaling her cue. The music was familiar, a piece she had practiced endlessly. But in that moment, it felt foreign, almost too big for her to handle. She took one last deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The ballroom was bathed in soft golden light, the grand chandelier casting a warm glow over the assembled guests. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes and champagne, and the low hum of conversation filled the space. But as soon as Layla stepped onto the stage, a hush fell over the room. Every pair of eyes turned toward her. Layla felt her breath caught in her throat. The lights were so bright that she could barely see the faces in the crowd. But she knew they were there, hundreds of people, all watching her, waiting for her to move. For a moment, fear threatened to overwhelm her. She felt like a small, fragile figure on a stage that was too grand, too magnificent for someone like her. But then, as the first few notes of the music played, something shifted. The familiar melody washed over her, and she let herself fall into it, let the music guide her movements. Her feet moved instinctively, her arms floating gracefully as she spun across the stage. Each step was precise, each leap perfectly timed. She had practiced this routine so many times that it was ingrained in her body, a second nature. But tonight it felt different. Tonight every movement carried a weight. Every gesture was filled with meaning. The audience was silent, their attention fixed on her as she danced. Layla's body moved effortlessly through the routine, her feet tapping lightly against the polished wood, her arms stretching gracefully into each position. As she moved into a series of pirouettes, her heart soared. This was it, her moment. But then, just as she launched into a particularly difficult combination, she felt a sudden jolt of panic. Her foot slipped ever so slightly, her balance faltering for a brief second. It was barely noticeable, but in that moment, it felt like the world had stopped. Layla's heart raced, her body stiffening as she fought to regain control. She could feel the eyes of the audience on her, waiting, judging, but she didn't have time to think, didn't have time to dwell on the mistake. She pushed forward, forcing herself to continue with the routine. Her movements are more determined, more urgent than before. When the final note of the music played, Layla sank into her final pose, her chest heaving with exertion. The ballroom was silent for a moment, and then, slowly, the sound of polite applause filled the air. It wasn't the thunderous ovation she had dreamed of, but it was enough. Layla took a deep breath and bowed, her mind still racing. As she stood, she caught sight of the Winters family seated in the front row. Clara Winters, dressed in an elegant gown, was staring at her with a cold, unreadable expression. Matthew Winters sat beside her, his face more neutral, but Layla could sense the tension between them. As she exited the stage, the polite applause fading behind her, Layla felt a knot of uncertainty tightening in her chest. She had made it through the performance, but something about the energy in the room didn't feel right. She had expected relief, but instead, all she felt was a growing sense of dread. Layla was still catching her breath backstage when she heard the voices, raised, sharp, and unmistakably angry. She didn't want to eavesdrop, but the tension in the air was thick, and it wasn't hard to make out the conversation coming from just outside the curtain. "I told you, Janet," Clara Winters' voice hissed, filled with barely controlled fury. "We specifically requested Jessica for this performance. What was that? Who is she?" Layla's stomach twisted. She knew instantly who Clara was talking about. The coldness in her tone left no doubt. "Jessica fell ill," Janet replied, her voice stiff but professional. "Layla was the next most qualified dancer. Miss Parker assured us that—" "I don't care what Miss Parker said," Clara interrupted, her voice rising. "This is not what we agreed on. That girl is not the image we want associated with our event. Do you understand?" Layla's heart pounded in her chest. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to stay out of sight, trying to disappear. The words stung, cutting through her like shards of ice. She had worked so hard, had poured every ounce of herself into that performance. And now to hear Clara dismiss her so casually, as though she was an embarrassment. was more than she could bear. There was a pause, and then Matthew Winter's voice cut through the air, softer but still tense. "Clara, let it go. The performance is over. We don't need to make a scene." Layla held her breath, her mind spinning. She wanted to run, to hide, to escape the reality of what she had just heard. But her feet were rooted to the spot, the weight of their words pressing down on her like a heavy blanket. She had always known that there would be people who didn't accept her, that there would be people who judged her based on things that had nothing to do with her talent. But hearing it spoken out loud, hearing the cold dismissal in Clara's voice, was worse than she had imagined. The door to the backstage area swung open, and Janet appeared, her expression tight with discomfort. When she saw Layla, her eyes widened slightly, and she hesitated for a moment before approaching. "Layla," she said softly, her voice filled with awkward sympathy. "I'm sorry about what you heard." Layla swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. "It's okay," she whispered, though it was anything but. "I understand." Janet gave her a strained smile. "You did well tonight. Don't let this discourage you." Layla nodded, though the words felt hollow. She forced a smile, but inside her heart was breaking. She had given everything she had to that performance, and in the end it hadn't been enough. Layla hadn't slept well the night after the Winters Gala. The events of the evening replayed in her mind on a loop, the soft applause, Clara's sharp words, and the overwhelming sense of disappointment that had followed her off stage. Even now, sitting at the kitchen table the next morning, with the sun streaming through the small window, it all felt like a bad dream she couldn't wake from. Karen sat across from her, watching her daughter's expression with concern. Layla hadn't touched her breakfast, and she could see the exhaustion and sadness in her eyes. Karen had been at the gala too, though seated far enough back that she hadn't heard Clara Winter's cruel remarks. But she knew her daughter well enough to understand that something had happened, something that had left a deep mark on Layla's spirit. "Do you want to talk about it?" Karen asked gently, sipping her coffee. Layla shook her head, staring down at her untouched plate of toast and eggs. She didn't know where to begin, didn't know how to put into words the crushing weight of what she had felt at the gala. It wasn't just about the performance, though her minor slip-up had stung. It was about everything that had come after. The cold indifference, the way Clara had dismissed her so easily, as if her presence on the stage had been an offense. "Was it that bad?" Karen asked softly, her voice filled with concern. Layla looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It's not about how I danced, Mama. I did okay, but I heard what Mrs. Winters said afterward." Her voice cracked slightly as she recounted the words that had cut her so deeply. "She said I wasn't what they wanted, that I wasn't the right image for their event." Karen's heart broke at the sight of her daughter's pain. She reached across the table, taking Layla's hand in hers. "Layla," she said gently, "you are so much more than what those people think of you. Their prejudice has nothing to do with your talent or your worth. They're wrong. You don't need their approval to know how amazing you are." Layla swallowed hard, trying to push back the tears that were threatening to spill over. She wanted to believe her mother's words, but the truth was, those comments had shaken her confidence in a way she hadn't expected. All the self-doubt she had worked so hard to suppress over the years had come rushing back in full force, and now she was struggling to see the point of it all. "What if they're right?" Layla whispered, her voice barely audible. "What if I don't belong in this world? No matter how hard I work, I'll always be seen as different. Maybe I'll never be enough." Karen's eyes softened, and she stood up, moving around the table to sit beside her daughter. She wrapped an arm around Layla's shoulders, pulling her close. "Layla, you listen to me," she said, her voice firm but full of love. "You have a gift. You have a passion for dance that no one can take away from you. And the world needs to see that. Don't let small-minded people like Clara Winters make you feel less than you are. You belong in this world because of your talent, your hard work, and your heart." Layla sniffed, resting her head on her mother's shoulder. She wanted to believe what Karen was saying, but the pain of Clara's words still lingered, like a shadow she couldn't shake. "I'm just so tired," Layla admitted softly. "I'm tired of always feeling like I have to prove myself to people who don't want to see me succeed." Karen squeezed her tightly, her heart aching for her daughter. "I know, baby. I know. But you've already proven yourself, Layla. You've proven it to me, to Miss Parker, and to everyone who's ever seen you dance. You don't need to prove anything to people like Clara Winters. You need to dance for yourself, for the love of it. Layla stayed silent for a moment, letting her mother's words wash over her. She knew Karen was right. Deep down, she knew that dancing was her passion, her way of expressing herself in a world that often felt too narrow. But it was hard to hold on to that love when the rest of the world seemed determined to tear her down. Finally, Layla sat up, wiping her eyes. I don't know if I can go back to the academy today, she said, her voice still shaky. Karen nodded, understanding the emotional toll the gala had taken on her daughter. Take the day off if you need to. Rest. But don't let this stop you, Layla. You've come too far to give up now. Layla hesitated, then nodded slowly. She didn't know how she would face the academy again, didn't know how she could walk back into the studio and pretend that everything was okay. But she also knew that if she didn't, she would be letting Clara Winters win, and that was something she couldn't allow. The next few days passed in a blur. Layla stayed home from the academy, trying to sort through the tangled web of emotions that had been building inside her since the gala. She spent hours in her room, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she was making the right decision by continuing to pursue ballet. Every time she thought about the gala, the pain of Clara Winters' words came rushing back, filling her with doubt. But despite her fears, the pull of dance remained strong. Every time she closed her eyes, she could see herself on stage, moving with grace and precision. The music called to her, whispering promises of the future she had always dreamed of. And yet, the shadow of rejection loomed large. One afternoon, while Karen was at work, Layla found herself standing in front of the mirror in the living room. She had put on her ballet shoes, though she hadn't meant to. They felt familiar, like old friends, and as she looked at her reflection, she couldn't help but feel the pull of the dancer inside her, the one who refused to give up. With a deep breath, she started to move. Slowly at first, her feet sliding across the floor in tentative steps. But as the music played in her mind, her movements became more confident, more assured. She let herself get lost in the rhythm, in the beauty of the dance. For a moment, all the doubts and fears melted away. She wasn't thinking about Clara Winters or the other girls at the academy. She wasn't worrying about whether she belonged. She was just dancing for herself, for the love of it. By the time she finished, her heart was pounding and her cheeks were flushed with exertion. But for the first time in days, she felt a sense of peace. She had forgotten how much joy dancing brought her, how it made her feel alive in a way nothing else could. It was in that moment that she knew she couldn't give up. No matter how hard it was, no matter how many obstacles she faced, she couldn't walk away from ballet. It was a part of her, something that went deeper than the approval of others. That evening, when Karen came home from work, Layla was waiting for her at the kitchen table. She had already made dinner, a simple meal of pasta and salad, and the aroma filled the small apartment. Karen's tired expression brightened when she saw the food, and she smiled at her daughter. You didn't have to do this, Karen said, sitting down at the table, but I appreciate it. Layla smiled back, though there was nervous energy in her chest. I wanted to. I also wanted to talk to you about something. Karen's eyes softened with concern as she poured herself a glass of water. What's on your mind? Layla took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. I've been thinking a lot about the gala, about what happened there, and what Mrs. Winters said. And I've realized something. As much as it hurt, as much as it made me question everything, I don't want to give up. I don't want to stop dancing. Karen's expression was a mixture of pride and relief. I'm glad to hear that, Layla. I was worried you might let what happened hold you back. Layla nodded, her resolve growing stronger with each word. I was scared, Mama. I still am. But I can't let their opinions define me. I love dancing too much to let it go. Karen reached across the table, taking her daughter's hand and giving it a reassuring squeeze. You're stronger than you think, Layla. I've always known that. And you're going to go far, no matter what obstacles you face. Don't ever doubt that. Layla smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time in days, she felt like she was on the right path again. But just as she was about to say something else, the phone rang, interrupting the moment. Karen got up to answer it, and Layla watched as her mother's expression shifted from surprise to curiosity. It's Miss Parker, Karen said, holding out the phone to Layla. She wants to talk to you. Layla's stomach flipped with nervous anticipation. She hadn't spoken to Miss Parker since the gala, and part of her had been dreading the conversation. What if Miss Parker had been disappointed in her performance? What if she agreed with Clara Winters? But there was no avoiding it now. Layla took the phone from her mother's hand, her heart pounding in her chest as she brought it to her ear. Hello. Layla, it's Miss Parker, came the familiar voice on the other end of the line. I wanted to check in on you. I haven't seen you at the academy this week, and I've been worried about you. Layla swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. I've just been taking some time to think. Miss Parker was silent for a moment, and then she spoke again, her tone gentle. I understand that the gala didn't go the way you had hoped. I know it was a difficult night for you, but I want you to know that I'm proud of you, Layla. You handled yourself with grace under pressure, and that's something not every dancer can do. Layla felt a rush of relief wash over her. She had been so afraid that Miss Parker would be disappointed, but instead her teacher's words filled her with a sense of validation she hadn't realized she needed. Thank you, Layla whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I've been struggling to figure out what to do next. I wasn't sure if I could face the academy again after everything that happened. Miss Parker's voice softened even more. Layla, the ballet world is full of challenges, some of them unfair. But the important thing is that you don't let those challenges define you. You have a rare talent, and I believe in you. You have a future in this art, but only if you keep pushing forward. Don't let this setback stop you. Layla closed her eyes, feeling the weight of Miss Parker's words settle over her. She knew her teacher was right. There would always be obstacles in her path, but she couldn't let them hold her back. I won't give up, Layla said, her voice steady with determination. I'm going to keep dancing. Good, Miss Parker replied, a note of pride in her voice. We'll be here when you're ready to come back. And Layla, there may be a new opportunity for you, but we'll talk about that when you return. Layla's heart skipped a beat. A new opportunity. What could that mean? But before she could ask, Miss Parker said her goodbyes, leaving Layla with a renewed sense of hope and curiosity. As she hung up the phone, Layla felt something she hadn't felt in days. Excitement. There was a new spark in her chest, a sense of possibility that hadn't been there before. Whatever this new opportunity was, it was enough to remind her that her journey wasn't over. Far from it. The next morning, Layla returned to the Bayside Ballet Academy. The familiar scent of polished wood and soft music filled the air as she walked through the glass doors. It felt strange being back after everything that had happened, but there was also comfort in the routine. The sound of pointed shoes tapping against the floor, the chatter of the other girls as they stretched at the berry. As Layla made her way to the changing room, she felt the eyes of her classmates on her. Some of them smiled politely, while others whispered amongst themselves. Layla couldn't help but wonder what they were saying. Had they heard about what had happened at the gala? Did they know about Clara Winters' cruel words? Layla kept her head down, changing into her leotard and slippers as quickly as she could. She had always felt out of place at Bayside, but today it felt even more pronounced. She could still hear Clara's voice in the back of her mind, telling her she wasn't the right image for their event, telling her she didn't belong, but she couldn't dwell on that now. She had come here to dance, and that's exactly what she was going to do. When she stepped into the studio, Miss Parker was already there, leading the girls through their warm-up routine. Layla quickly found a spot at the bar and joined in, her muscles stiff from the days she had spent away from practice. But as she moved, the familiar rhythm of the exercises brought a sense of calm. This was where she belonged, on the dance floor, in the studio, letting her body express what her words couldn't. After the warm-up, Miss Parker called for the girls to gather around. She glanced at Layla, a small smile on her lips. Layla, I'm glad you're back, she said. I know the last week has been difficult, but I've been thinking about what's next for you. Layla felt her heart race with nervous anticipation. She remembered the hint Miss Parker had dropped during their phone call the night before. A new opportunity. The Winters Gala may not have gone the way we had hoped, Miss Parker continued, her eyes scanning the group. But it doesn't change the fact that you showed incredible strength and determination. You've grown a lot as a dancer, Layla, and I think it's time for you to take the next step. Layla's pulse quickened. What did that mean? Miss Parker turned to the group, addressing all the girls now. As you know, we've been in discussions with several ballet companies about potential scholarships for our students. I've recommended Layla for a summer intensive program at the New York City Ballet School. Layla's breath caught in her throat. The New York City Ballet? It was one of the most prestigious ballet schools in the country, and opportunity dancers across the world would dream of. The thought of being accepted into a program like that had never even seemed like a possibility for her. The program is extremely competitive, Miss Parker continued, but I believe Layla has the talent and dedication to thrive there. If accepted, she would spend the summer training with some of the best instructors in the world. Layla's mind was spinning. She had just been grappling with whether or not she could even continue dancing. And now Miss Parker was offering her a chance to train at one of the top ballet schools in the world. Miss Parker looked directly at Layla, her expression filled with pride. You've worked hard, Layla, and you deserve this opportunity. I'll help you prepare your application, and with your permission, we'll submit it next week. Layla nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. The room around her seemed to blur as her mind raced with the possibilities. The New York City Ballet School, a summer intensive. It was everything she had ever dreamed of. But with that excitement came a surge of doubt. Could she really do this? Was she good enough to compete at that level? And what if she faced more rejection, like she had at the Winter's Gala? As the other girls congratulated her with polite smiles, Layla's heart pounded in her chest. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to face it. But she knew one thing for sure: she had to try. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparations. Layla threw herself into her training with renewed energy, determined to be ready for the New York City Ballet's summer intensive program. Miss Parker worked with her tirelessly, helping her perfect every move, every step, every leap. There was no room for error now. If Layla was going to compete with the best dancers in the country, she had to be at the top of her game. It wasn't just about technique anymore. It was about mental fortitude. Layla knew that she couldn't let the fear of rejection hold her back. She had to face it head on, with the same determination she had shown at the gala, even in the face of adversity. But as the day to submit her application drew closer, Layla couldn't help but feel the weight of the expectations pressing down on her. This was the biggest opportunity of her life, and the thought of failing, of being told she wasn't good enough, terrified her. One evening, after a particularly grueling rehearsal, Layla sat on the floor of the studio, her muscles aching and her heart heavy with doubt. The other girls had already left, and the studio was quiet, save for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Miss Parker walked over and sat down beside her, sensing the turmoil in her student's expression. "You're doing well, Layla," Miss Parker said, her voice calm and steady, "but I can see that something's bothering you." Layla looked down at her hands, which were still trembling from the intensity of the rehearsal. She had been pushing herself harder than ever, but no matter how much she improved, the doubt lingered. "What if I'm not good enough?" Layla whispered, her voice barely audible. "What if I go to New York and I fail? What if I can't keep up with the other dancers?" Miss Parker was quiet for a moment, then placed a hand on Layla's shoulder. "Layla, every dancer has those doubts. Every dancer wonders if they're good enough at some point. But the difference between those who succeed and those who don't is that the ones who succeed keep going, even when they're scared." Layla looked up, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "You're going to face challenges, Layla," Miss Parker continued, her voice gentle but firm. "There will be moments when you feel like giving up, but I believe in you. I wouldn't have recommended you for this program if I didn't think you had what it takes." Layla took a deep breath, letting Miss Parker's words sink in. She wanted to believe in herself, but the fear of failure was still so strong. "Remember why you started dancing," Miss Parker said softly. "It wasn't to prove anything to anyone. It was because you love it. Don't lose sight of that. Let that love guide you." Layla nodded, feeling a flicker of hope in her chest. She had been so focused on the pressure, on the fear of not being good enough, that she had forgotten why she danced in the first place. It was the joy of movement, the freedom she felt when she was on stage, that had drawn her to ballet in the first place. "Thank you, Miss Parker," Layla whispered, her voice steadier now. "I'll keep that in mind." Miss Parker smiled, standing up and offering her hand to Layla. Good. Now go home and rest. You've got a big day ahead of you tomorrow. Layla took her teacher's hand and stood, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't going to let fear hold her back anymore. She was going to face the future with courage and determination, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The day had finally arrived. Layla stood outside the post office holding the envelope that contained her application to the New York City Ballet's summer intensive program. Her heart was pounding in her chest as she stared at the envelope, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Karen stood beside her, offering silent support. Layla hadn't said much that morning, but Karen could see the nervous energy radiating from her daughter. "Are you ready?" Karen asked softly, her voice filled with encouragement. Layla took a deep breath, clutching the envelope tightly in her hands. She had worked so hard for this moment, had pushed herself to her limits and beyond, and now it all came down to this: one envelope, one chance. "I think so," Layla said, though her voice wavered slightly. Karen smiled, placing a reassuring hand on her daughter's shoulder. "You've done everything you can, Layla. Now it's time to take the leap." Layla nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of fear and excitement. She knew that this was a turning point in her life, a moment that would define her future. And even though she was scared, even though the possibility of rejection loomed large, she couldn't let that stop her. With a final deep breath, Layla stepped forward and dropped the envelope into the mailbox. The metal clanged as the envelope disappeared into the slot, and for a moment Layla felt like time had stopped. She had done it. She had taken the leap. Karen pulled her into a tight embrace, whispering words of pride and encouragement in her ear. "I'm so proud of you, Mia. No matter what happens, you've already accomplished something incredible." Layla hugged her mother back, tears of relief and gratitude welling in her eyes. She had taken the first step, and now all she could do was wait. As they walked back to the car, Layla couldn't help but feel a sense of weightlessness. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. She had faced her fears, and now she was ready for whatever came next. In the days that followed, Layla threw herself into her training with renewed passion. She didn't know whether she would be accepted into the program, but she knew that she was ready for whatever challenge came her way. She had found her love for dance again, and that was enough to keep her going. Weeks passed, and every day Layla anxiously checked the mailbox, waiting for the letter that would determine her future. Each day her anticipation grew, the waiting becoming more unbearable. But no matter how nervous she was, she kept dancing. She knew that no matter what the outcome, ballet would always be a part of her life. Finally, one afternoon, the letter arrived. Layla stood in the doorway of their apartment, the envelope trembling in her hands. Karen stood behind her, her expression filled with a mixture of hope and anticipation. "You don't have to open it right now," Karen said gently. "Take your time." But Layla knew she couldn't wait any longer. With shaking hands, she carefully tore open the envelope, pulling out the letter inside. Her eyes scanned the words, her heart racing with every line. And then she saw it, the word that made her heart soar: accepted. Layla let out a gasp, her hands flying to her mouth as tears of joy filled her eyes. She turned to her mother, her voice breaking with emotion. "I got in, Mama. I got in." Karen's eyes filled with tears, and she pulled her daughter into a tight embrace. "I knew you would, baby. I knew you would." Layla held on to her mother, her heart bursting with happiness and relief. She had done it. She had taken the leap, and it had paid off. The future she had always dreamed of was finally within her reach. As she stood there, wrapped in her mother's arms, Layla knew that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome. But for now, at this moment, she was exactly where she was meant to be. Layla had never been to New York City before. As she stepped off the train at Penn Station, her heart raced with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The air was thick with the hum of the city, honking cars, people rushing past, the scent of food trucks and hot concrete. It was overwhelming, but thrilling at the same time. She gripped the handle of her suitcase tightly as she and Karen navigated the crowded station. The towering buildings and fast-paced energy made her feel small, but also invigorated. This was the place where dreams came true, the city that never slept. And now she was here, about to embark on the biggest challenge of her life. As they exited the station and hailed a cab, Layla stared wide-eyed at the streets of Manhattan. The towering skyscrapers seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky, and the city buzzed with life in every direction. She could hardly believe she was here, about to begin her summer training with one of the most prestigious ballet schools in the world. Karen sat beside her, her face a mixture of pride and sadness. Layla knew her mother was struggling with the idea of being apart for the summer. This was the first time they'd be separated for such a long stretch, and it weighed heavily on both of them. When they pulled up in front of the New York City Ballet School, Layla's heart skipped a beat. The building was sleek and modern, its tall glass windows reflecting the bustling city around it. It was even more imposing than she had imagined. She could see dancers through the windows, moving with an effortless grace that made her heart pound with anticipation and fear. "You ready for this, Mija?" Karen asked, her voice soft but filled with love. Layla took a deep breath, nodding as she tried to steady her nerves. "I think so," she said, though the words felt fragile on her lips. Karen smiled and gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "You're going to do great, Layla. You've worked so hard for this. Just remember why you're here, because you're talented and you deserve to be." Layla swallowed hard and forced a smile. She knew her mother was right, but the weight of what was about to happen felt overwhelming. This was the New York City Ballet School. She would be training alongside the best dancers in the country. Could she really keep up? After checking in and receiving her dorm room key, Layla and Karen made their way upstairs to her new home for the summer. The dorm was small but cozy, with a twin bed, a desk, and a window that looked out over the bustling street below. Layla felt a mixture of excitement and nerves as she unpacked her things, her heart fluttering with every passing moment. As Karen helped her settle in, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Layla would be on her own here. She would have to manage her own schedule, navigate the intense training sessions, and deal with the pressure of living up to the school's incredibly high expectations. Karen turned to her daughter, her eyes filled with emotion. "I'm proud of you, Layla," she said softly. "You've come so far. Don't let anyone or anything make you doubt yourself. You belong here." Layla nodded, blinking back tears. "I'm going to miss you, Mama." Karen pulled her into a tight embrace. "I'll miss you too, baby. But this is your time. You've worked for this, and I know you're going to shine." Layla clung to her mother, savoring the comfort of her arms. She had never felt more scared, but she also knew that this was the opportunity of a lifetime. When they finally said goodbye, Layla stood at the door of her dorm room, watching as her mother's figure disappeared down the hallway. She wiped her eyes, took a deep breath, and turned back toward the room. This was it, her new beginning. The first week at the New York City Ballet School was a whirlwind. The schedule was grueling. Early morning warm-ups, hours of technique classes, rehearsals, and conditioning exercises that left Layla's muscles burning. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced, and the intensity of the training pushed her to her limits. Every morning, Layla woke up sore and exhausted, her body screaming from the physical demands of the program. But as she looked around the studio at the other dancers, each of them moving with a grace and precision that took her breath away, she knew she had to keep pushing. This was what she had signed up for, and she couldn't afford to fall behind. The other dancers in the program were just as focused and driven as she was. There was Elena, a tall, elegant girl from California who had already trained with some of the top ballet instructors in the world. Then there was Sophia, a fiery and intense dancer from Brazil who seemed to pour her soul into every movement. And finally, there was Tara, a soft-spoken but technically flawless dancer from the Midwest. Each of them was extraordinary in their own way, and Layla quickly realized that the competition was fierce. Everyone here was talented. Everyone here had worked their entire lives to get to this point. There was no room for error, no time for self-doubt. But despite the pressure, Layla felt a sense of belonging that she hadn't expected. For the first time in her life, she was surrounded by people who understood her passion for ballet. They shared the same drive, the same dedication, the same willingness to sacrifice everything for the art they loved. Still, it wasn't easy. Every class was a battle against her own body, her own mind. There were moments when the exhaustion became overwhelming, when she felt like she couldn't keep going. And there were days when her old fears resurfaced. The fear that she wasn't good enough, that she didn't belong here. One afternoon, during a particularly difficult rehearsal, Layla felt herself faltering. They were working on a complex sequence that involved a series of pirouettes followed by a grand jeté. And no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't get the timing right. Her muscles were aching, and her mind was clouded with frustration. "Again, Layla," the instructor, Madame Dubois, called out, her sharp eyes watching every move. "You're not using your turnout properly. You need to engage your core." Layla nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She was trying, she really was, but her body wasn't cooperating. She attempted the sequence again, but halfway through she stumbled, her feet slipping out from under her. The room went silent as Layla landed on the floor, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. The other dancers glanced at her, some with sympathy, others with barely concealed annoyance. Madame Dubois sighed, her expression stern. "You must focus, Layla. You're letting the pressure get to you. If you don't fix this, you won't be ready for the final showcase." The words stung, and Layla felt a lump form in her throat. The final showcase is an end-of-summer performance where the top students would have the chance to dance in front of talent scouts and professional ballet companies. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, but now it feels like it was slipping away from her. As the rehearsal continued, Layla couldn't shake the feeling that she was falling behind. The other dancers seemed so much more confident, so much more in control of their bodies. Elena, Sophia, and Tara were all excelling, while Layla struggled to keep up. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Layla snuck into the empty studio. She couldn't let the day end like this. She needed to prove to herself that she could do it, that she belonged here. The studio was quiet, the moonlight streaming through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Layla slipped on her pointed shoes and stood in front of the mirror, her reflection staring back at her with tired eyes. She took a deep breath and began the sequence again, her body moving through the familiar steps. Her feet ached and her legs were trembling, but she pushed through the pain. She had to get this right. But no matter how hard she tried, her body felt heavy, her movements sluggish. She stumbled again, frustration boiling over as she collapsed onto the floor, her chest heaving with exhaustion. Tears welled up in her eyes and she buried her face in her hands. She had worked so hard to get here, but it felt like it wasn't enough. The other dancers were getting better, while she seemed to be falling apart. "Why can't I do this?" Layla whispered to herself, her voice breaking with emotion. For a moment, she considered giving up. Maybe Clara Winters had been right all along. Maybe she didn't belong in this world. Maybe she wasn't cut out for the intensity of professional ballet. But then, in the quiet of the studio, a voice echoed in her mind. It was her mother's voice, full of love and encouragement. "You belong here, Layla. You've worked for this, and I know you're going to shine." Layla wiped her eyes, taking a deep breath. She couldn't give up now. She had come too far. Her mother believed in her, Miss Parker believed in her, and deep down, she believed in herself too. She stood up, shaking out her arms and legs, and tried the sequence again. This time she moved with more intention, more focus. Her feet hit the floor with precision, her arms floating gracefully through the air. She was still tired, still sore, but she kept going. And finally, after what felt like hours, she landed the sequence perfectly. Her chest heaved with relief as she sank into her final pose, the moonlight illuminating her tired but triumphant face. Layla smiled to herself, her heart swelling with pride. She could do this. She just needed to trust herself, to push through doubt and fear. In the weeks that followed, Layla's confidence grew. The late-night practices and grueling rehearsals began to pay off, and she started to see real improvement in her technique. Her turns were sharper, her leaps more controlled, and her timing more precise. She was still exhausted, but there was a fire inside her now, a determination to prove that she belonged here. Madame Dubois noticed the change as well. During class one morning, after Layla completed a particularly difficult series of pirouettes, Madame Dubois nodded approvingly. "Good, Layla," she said, her tone softer than usual. "You've been working hard. I can see the improvement." Layla's heart soared at the praise. It wasn't often that Madame Dubois offered compliments, and when she did, it meant something. The other dancers were noticing too. Elena, Sophia, and Tara began to treat Layla with more respect, seeing her as a real contender for the final showcase. There was still a sense of competition between them, but it was no longer tinged with the same sense of superiority. They saw Layla as one of them now, a dancer who could hold her own. As the final showcase approached, the pressure intensified. The instructors began selecting dancers for solos and featured roles, and every class felt like an audition. Layla knew that this was her chance to shine, but the nerves were still there, lurking beneath the surface. One afternoon, as she was stretching before class, Sophia sat down beside her. The Brazilian dancer had always been intense, her movements full of passion and energy, but today she seemed calmer, more reflective. "You're doing well, Layla," Sophia said, her accent thick but warm. "I've been watching you. You've improved a lot." Layla smiled, feeling a sense of pride swell in her chest. "Thanks. I've been working hard." Sophia nodded, her eyes serious. "We all have, but you have something different, something special." Layla blinked, surprised by the compliment. "What do you mean?" Sophia hesitated for a moment, then spoke softly. "You dance with your heart. I can see it in the way you move. It's not just technique for you. It's something deeper. That's what makes you stand out." Layla felt her cheeks flush with emotion. She had always believed that ballet was about more than just perfecting the steps. It was about expressing something inside her, something she couldn't put into words. To hear someone else acknowledge that meant more than she could say. "Thank you," Layla whispered, her voice thick with gratitude. Sophia smiled, standing up and stretching her arms overhead. "You're going to do great in the showcase. I can feel it." Layla watched as Sophia walked away, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and determination. The final showcase was just days away, and for the first time, Layla felt ready. She had worked for this moment, and she wasn't going to let fear hold her back. The day of the final showcase arrived, and the energy in the air was electric. The theater was packed with talent scouts, ballet company directors, and influential figures from the dance world. It was the kind of audience that could change a dancer's life forever. Layla stood backstage, her heart pounding in her chest as she watched the other dancers prepare. She had been selected for a solo, an opportunity that filled her with both excitement and terror. This was it, her chance to prove that she belonged on this stage, in this world. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she also knew that she had worked for this. She had spent countless hours perfecting her routine, pushing through exhaustion and doubt. Now all that was left to do was dance. As the lights dimmed and the music began, Layla stepped onto the stage. The spotlight hit her, blinding her momentarily, but she didn't falter. She took her starting position, her arms floating gracefully above her head, her feet perfectly pointed. The music swelled, and Layla began to move. Her body flowed effortlessly through the routine, her feet hitting the floor with precision, her arms slicing through the air with grace. She could feel the audience watching her, but for the first time, it didn't scare her. She wasn't dancing for them, she was dancing for herself. Every step, every leap, every spin was a testament to the months of hard work, the late nights spent practicing, the moments of doubt and fear that she had overcome. She had pushed through it all, and now she was free. As she moved into the final sequence of her routine, Layla felt a surge of emotion. This was her moment. She leaped into the air, her arms outstretched, her heart soaring. And as she landed, perfectly poised, the music came to an end. For a moment there was silence, and then the theater erupted in applause. Layla stood there, her chest heaving with exertion as the audience rose to their feet. The applause washed over her, filling her with a sense of accomplishment that she had never felt before. She had done it. As she took her bow, tears filled her eyes. This was everything she had worked for, everything she had dreamed of. And now it was real. Backstage, her fellow dancers congratulated her, their faces filled with admiration and respect. Elena, Sophia, and Tara all embraced her, their own performances having gone well, but they knew that tonight, Layla had stolen the show. Later, as she stood outside the theater with Karen, who had flown in to see the performance, Layla felt a sense of peace settling over her. She had faced her fears, had pushed through doubt, and had emerged stronger on the other side. "You were incredible, Mija," Karen said, her eyes shining with pride. "I knew you could do it." Layla smiled, hugging her mother tightly. "Thank you, Mama. I couldn't have done it without you." As they stood there basking in the glow of the evening, Layla knew that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more moments of doubt and fear. But she was ready for them. She had found her strength, her voice, and her place in the world of ballet. And she wasn't going to let anything stop her. The weeks after the final showcase passed in a blur. Layla's solo performance had caught the attention of several talent scouts and directors in the audience, and her name had begun to circulate in the ballet world. It was everything she had ever dreamed of. The possibility of being noticed, of having her talent recognized by the very people who could open doors to a future she had only imagined. Back at the New York City Ballet School, the atmosphere was celebratory. The final showcase had been a resounding success, and the students were filled with excitement about the opportunities that might come their way. For Layla, it felt like her life had been set on a new course, one filled with potential and possibility. One afternoon, as Layla was packing up her things to return home for a short break before the next phase of her journey, she received a call that would change everything. She was sitting on the edge of her bed in the dorm room when her phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, but something about it made her heart race. She answered, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling inside her. "Hello? Hello, is this Layla Johnson?" A smooth professional voice asked. "Yes, this is Layla," she replied, sitting up straighter. "This is Samantha Moore, one of the directors at the American Ballet Theater. I had the pleasure of watching you perform at the final showcase, and I've been following your progress since then." Layla's heart nearly stopped. American Ballet Theater? One of the most prestigious ballet companies in the world? She could barely believe what she was hearing. "I wanted to personally invite you to audition for our junior company," Samantha continued. "We believe you have great potential, and we'd love to see how you would fit into our program." Layla's breath caught in her throat. This was it. The opportunity she had been working toward her entire life. It was a dream come true, an invitation to audition for one of the top ballet companies in the world. She could hardly find the words to respond. I am honored," Layla finally managed to say, her voice shaking with emotion. "Wonderful," Samantha said warmly. "We'll be in touch with more details about the audition. I look forward to seeing you there, Layla." As the call ended, Layla sat there in stunned silence, the weight of the moment settling over her. She had been given an opportunity that most dancers only dreamed of. All the struggles, the setbacks, the moments of doubt, it had all been worth it. She quickly called her mother, her voice trembling with excitement as she relayed the news. "Mama, you won't believe this," Layla said breathlessly. "I just got a call from the American Ballet Theater. They want me to audition for their junior company." There was a brief moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line, and then Karen's voice broke through, filled with joy and pride. "Layla, that's amazing," Karen exclaimed, her voice thick with emotion. "I knew this day would come. I'm so proud of you, Mija. You've worked so hard for this, and now it's finally happening." Layla's heart swelled at her mother's words, tears of joy filling her eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mama. You've always been there for me, even when things were tough." Karen's voice softened. "Layla, you've always had the talent, the determination, and the heart. I just helped you along the way. This is all you, Mija. You earned this." After the call ended, Layla sat in her room, letting the enormity of the moment sink in. This was the culmination of everything she had fought for, every late-night practice, every tear shed, every moment of doubt she had overcome. She had finally proven to herself and to the world that she belonged in the world of ballet. But even as she basked in the joy of her success, Layla knew that this was just the beginning. The audition for the American Ballet Theater would be the next big challenge for a new mountain to climb. And while the thought of it filled her with nerves, it also filled her with excitement. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to stop now. The day of Layla's audition for the American Ballet Theater Junior Company arrived, and the air was thick with anticipation. Layla stood in the studio, her body warmed up and ready, her heart pounding with both excitement and fear. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, working harder than ever to ensure she was at her best. The audition process was rigorous. The panel of directors and instructors watched with sharp, discerning eyes, evaluating every movement, every turn, every leap. The room was silent except for the sound of feet hitting the floor and the soft strains of music filling the air. Layla danced with all the grace and passion she had inside her, letting the music carry her across the floor. She poured every ounce of herself into the performance, allowing the emotions she had carried with her throughout her journey to fuel her movements. This was her moment, and she wasn't going to let fear hold her back. When the audition was over, Layla stood with the other dancers, waiting for the final decisions. The tension in the room was palpable, but Layla held on to the words of advice her mother had given her before she left. Dance with your heart, and everything else will fall into place. Finally, Samantha Moore stood up and addressed the group. Her face was calm, but there was a gleam of excitement in her eyes as she looked at the dancers. "Thank you all for your hard work today," Samantha began. "You've shown incredible talent, and I know that each of you has a bright future ahead of you in ballet. However, we can only select a few dancers for our junior company." Layla's heart raced as Samantha's eyes scanned the room. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she stood tall, determined to face whatever came next with grace. Samantha smiled as she continued. "I'm pleased to announce that Layla Johnson will be one of the dancers joining the American Ballet Theatre Junior Company." Layla's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she couldn't believe what she had heard. She had been chosen. She had done it. The room erupted in applause, and Layla felt her body flood with a mixture of relief and overwhelming joy. She had worked so hard for this, and now it was real. She had been accepted into one of the most prestigious ballet companies in the world. As she stepped forward to shake Samantha's hand, Layla's mind raced with memories of everything that had brought her to this point. The countless hours of training, the support of her mother, the setbacks she had faced, and the triumphs she had achieved. It had all led her here, to this moment of victory. After the audition, Layla called Karen, her voice filled with excitement as she shared the news. "Mama, I got in!" Layla exclaimed, tears of joy streaming down her face. "I'm part of the company?" Karen's voice broke with emotion on the other end of the line. "Layla, I'm so proud of you. You've worked so hard for this, and you deserve every bit of it." Layla wiped her tears, her heart bursting with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mama. You believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself." Karen's voice softened. "You always had it in you, Layla. You just needed to see it for yourself." In the days that followed, Layla began to settle into her new life as a member of the junior company. The training was intense, the expectations high, but she faced each challenge with the same determination that had carried her through every step of her journey. There were still moments of doubt, still days when the pressure felt overwhelming, but Layla had learned something invaluable along the way, that she was stronger than she had ever realized. She had faced rejection, prejudice, and self-doubt, but she had risen above it all, and now she was standing on the threshold of a future she had only ever dreamed of. As she walked through the bustling streets of New York City, heading toward the ballet studio for another day of training, Layla felt a sense of peace and purpose. She had found her place in the world, and she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would face them with courage and grace. Layla stopped for a moment, looking up at the towering skyscrapers above her, the city alive with possibility. She smiled, her heart full of hope for the future. This was just the beginning. Layla's journey from a young girl with dreams of dancing on the biggest stages to a member of the American Ballet Theatre Junior Company is a testament to the power of perseverance, self-belief, and resilience. Throughout her story, Layla faced countless challenges, doubt, prejudice, and fear, but she never gave up. She learned to trust herself, to dance with her heart, and to push beyond the limits others tried to impose on her. In the end, Layla's story is not just about ballet, it's about finding one's place in the world, about believing in your own worth, and about the strength it takes to follow your dreams, no matter the obstacles. Her journey is an inspiration to anyone who has ever been told they don't belong, or that they're not good enough. It's a reminder that with determination and heart, you can rise above anything. The early morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the American Ballet Theater's rehearsal studio, casting soft golden light across the polished wood floors. Layla stood at the bar, stretching her limbs and taking in the quiet energy of the room. This was her new home now, a place she had dreamed of for so long. And yet, as surreal as it all felt, the rhythm of it, the discipline, the focus, the joy of movement was something she had known for as long as she could remember. It had been 3 months since Layla had joined the junior company, and life had taken on a new pace. Each day was filled with back-to-back rehearsals, classes, and performances. The demands of being in a professional company were intense, more than she had ever imagined. But there was something exhilarating about it too. Every morning she woke up knowing she was doing exactly what she was meant to do. But even as her career was blossoming, there were still challenges to face. Life in New York City was vastly different from the quiet, familiar rhythm of home. Layla missed the comforts of her small apartment with her mother. She missed their late-night talks at the kitchen table, the smell of Karen's home-cooked meals, and the warmth of her mother's hugs after a long day. Here in the sprawling metropolis of Manhattan, everything moved fast, and Layla often found herself feeling like she was struggling to keep up. As she stretched, preparing for another long day of rehearsals, Layla's thoughts wandered to an upcoming performance that had been weighing heavily on her mind. It was a small part in a new ballet, but it was her first solo performance since joining the company. The pressure was mounting, and Layla could feel the weight of expectations settling on her shoulders once again. She wanted to prove herself not just to her directors and peers, but to herself. Just then, a voice interrupted her thoughts. "Hey, Layla," came a familiar voice from behind her. Layla turned to see Elena, the tall, graceful dancer from California, who had become one of her closest friends in the company. Elena was smiling, her hair pulled back into a neat bun, and she looked as poised as ever. "You ready for today?" Elena asked, adjusting her leg warmers. Layla smiled, though there was a hint of nervousness in her eyes. "I think so. It's just the solo. I want it to be perfect." Elena gave her a knowing look. "I get it, but you've been rehearsing for weeks. You've got this. Remember, it's not just about being perfect. It's about feeling the music, telling the story. You always do that better than anyone." Layla appreciated the encouragement. Elena had been supportive from the start, and having someone like her to confide in made the challenges of company life a little easier to bear. "Thanks," Layla said, taking a deep breath. "I'll try to keep that in mind." The two of them continued to stretch, the soft strains of music from a nearby rehearsal room filling the air. Layla's nerves were still there, but Elena's words reminded her of something important. Ballet wasn't just about technical perfection. It was about expression, about heart, and Layla had always danced with her heart. Later that evening, Layla stood backstage at the theater, waiting for her cue. The performance was about to begin, and she could hear the low hum of the audience settling into their seats. The theater was packed, and Layla's heart raced as she peeked out from behind the curtain. This was her first time performing in such a prestigious venue, and the magnitude of it all was starting to sink in. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She thought of Karen, who had flown in from home to see the performance. Knowing her mother was in the audience watching her made Layla feel both proud and anxious. Karen had always been her biggest supporter, the one who had believed in her when she hadn't believed in herself. As the lights dimmed and the music began, Layla stepped onto the stage. The spotlight hit her, and for a moment, everything else fell away. The nerves, the pressure, the weight of expectation. She was here, in this moment, doing what she loved. The music swelled, and Layla began to move, her body flowing through the familiar steps of the routine. Her movements were fluid, her arms reaching out gracefully, her feet gliding across the stage with precision. But more than that, she danced with emotion, with the passion that had always driven her, from her very first dance class to this moment on one of the world's grandest stages. As she leaped and twirled, Layla felt a sense of freedom, of joy. This was what she had always dreamed of, the chance to express herself, to tell a story through movement. Every step, every turn was filled with the love she had for ballet. When the performance ended, the applause erupted from the audience. Layla stood on stage, her chest heaving with exertion, her heart pounding in her chest. She had done it. She had danced her heart out, and the audience had felt it. As she took her bow, her eyes scanned the crowd, and she spotted Karen in the front row, clapping with tears in her eyes. Layla smiled, her heart swelling with pride. This moment was for her mother, for all the sacrifices Karen had made to help her get here. After the performance, Layla and Karen met backstage. Karen enveloped her daughter in a tight embrace, her eyes filled with emotion. "You were incredible, Layla," Karen whispered. "I've never been prouder." Layla smiled through her tears, holding on to her mother. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mama. You've always been there for me." Karen pulled back, looking into her daughter's eyes. "You've worked so hard for this, Layla. This is your moment, and I know there are so many more moments like this ahead for you." As they stood there, mother and daughter, Layla realized how far she had come. From the small ballet studio back home to the stage of the American Ballet Theater, her journey had been one of perseverance, of overcoming doubt and fear, and now she was on the path to fulfilling her dreams. In the weeks and months that followed, Layla's career continued to flourish. She took on more roles within the junior company, and with each performance, her confidence grew. She had found her place in the ballet world, and though the road ahead would still have its challenges, she knew she was ready for whatever came next. Layla's story was far from over. There were still new heights to reach, new performances to conquer, new dreams to chase. But as she stood on the threshold of her bright future, she knew one thing for sure. She belonged here. She had faced doubts, prejudice, the fears, and she had risen above them all. Layla was no longer the girl who questioned whether she was good enough. She was a dancer who had learned that her worth wasn't determined by anyone else's expectations. Her strength came from within, from her passion, her heart, and the love she had for the art of ballet. And now, as she looked toward the future, Layla knew that this was just the beginning of her journey. The world of ballet was hers to explore, and she would continue to dance with the same grace, strength, and heart that had brought her here. Because no matter where life took her, Layla would always dance. Layla's journey reminds us all that no dream is too big, and no challenge is too great when you have the determination to keep pushing forward. From overcoming doubt to rising above prejudice, her story is a testament to the power of perseverance and following your heart. If Layla's story has inspired you, let us know in the comments below. How has her journey moved you to chase your own dreams? And if you want to stay updated with more uplifting and inspiring stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you'll be the first to hear about new tales of triumph, creativity, and the pursuit of greatness. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey with Layla. And remember, no matter where life takes you, always dance to the rhythm of your heart. Hit that subscribe button now and stay tuned for more stories that will inspire and uplift your spirit.